Welcome back to the Bridgehead Briefing, everyone. What is going on in Canada? This is a question that a lot of Canadians have been asking themselves over the last couple of years, and now we're seeing this question not just being asked in Canada, but also around the world, as videos of Islamist riots and Islamist protests unfold across Canada. Now, when I say Islamist, I use this term very, very advisedly. I don't just mean Muslim Canadians. I mean people who are committed to the destruction of the state of Israel, people who are opposed to traditional Western values. I use that phrase very deliberately as well. And we saw this on display, especially this week, because this week was the one-year anniversary of the horrifying Hamas attacks on Israeli women, men, and children 1 year ago. And it's really, really shocking, even shocking for me, and I've been tracking stories like this for over 10 years now, to see just how overt and just how upfront both Islamist Canadians as well as their left-wing allies are being about what their goals are. And we're seeing a lot of these calls for violence being made with naked aggression from Toronto all the way to Vancouver and beyond. At McGill University recently, protesters waving Palestinian flags smashed windows. There was a walkout in Ajax, Ontario at the J. Clark Richardson Collegiate with hundreds of students chanting Allahu Akbar. And I think it's important for you to see some of the things that are happening in Canada, because it's really easy to write off little slogans and short video clips as well. But let's take a look at a couple of video clips here that show what they're actually saying in their own words. And I think that's really important to do. So the first clip here I want to show you was shot by Jared Yager. I think that's how to pronounce his name. Apologies to him if I mispronounced that. And posted by a whole bunch of people, including the conservative Jewish MP Melissa Landsman. Now listen to their words very carefully as they set a Canadian flag on fire in Vancouver. There's not a lot of nuance in that clip, as I'm sure you'll agree. A Canadian flag gets set on fire and then torn apart while they chant Israel, burn, burn, which is, of course, what happened on October 7. Little children were set on fire. Wounded people were set ablaze after having gasoline dumped on them. And of course, as we speak, and as this rally was going on, we actually saw rockets being fired at Israel, which is now being attacked on 7 fronts. Let me show you another clip. This one is also from Vancouver. And listen to these chants and hear what they're saying. Again, there's no nuance here. There's no disagreement on Middle Eastern foreign policy. This is just an open and naked endorsement of terrorists who are recognized as terrorists by the Canadian government and guilty of the most horrifying acts.
We are the Black Panthers. We are the Double Tigers. We are Al-Ansar. We are the Zapatistas. We are the FLN. And yes, we are Hezbollah and we are Hamas.
Again, notice what they're saying there. We are Hezbollah and we are Hamas. And notice what got the biggest cheer from the crowd too. It was for Hamas and Hezbollah, which are Iranian proxies set up for the purpose of inflicting terror on the state of Israel, but also people around the world. 8 Canadians were killed on October 7 as well, a fact that was not brought up very often and not very well known. You can't nuance this. And I also find it interesting that as they chant off all of these different groups, these groups have very little in common. There's communist groups like the Black Panthers, there's the Tamil Tigers, and as they list off all of these groups, I think it's important to note that there's one commonality between these very disparate groups of people, and it's that all of them despise the West, and all of them are willing to use terror and violence against the West, which explains why the same group of people was tearing apart a Canadian flag, first hanging it upside down and then setting it on fire. Now, just in case you'd like to nuance what they're saying here and saying, well, for them, Hamas just emphasizes resistance to occupation, or, Hezbollah is a perfectly legitimate group in Lebanon that also does all kinds of charitable work, which is something that I've literally heard before. Here's the protesters calling the October attacks a brilliant and beautiful operation and cheering the rockets that were heading towards Tel Aviv, a civilian city, during that rally.
On this day, in the first 20 minutes of Tufan al-Aqsa, 5,000 rockets were hit straight to Tel Aviv. On this day, we celebrate Tufan al-Aqsa. We celebrate the most brilliant and beautiful operation done by our resistance. This is a day to celebrate getting our land back.
So for those of you who don't know what she's referring to there, when she says Al-Aqsa resistance, that's what they refer to. That's how they describe October 7. And so finally, one more clip from that Vancouver rally. It's kind of jarring for me. I went to school in Vancouver. I grew up in the Fraser Valley to see this unfolding in Vancouver. Here's another speaker saying one October 7 wasn't enough. We need more October 7s.
What would you do? You will fight back. You will resist. You will carry October 7 10 times more.
You will carry out October 7's 10 times more. Notice again the cheers. Notice how they cheer. And there's been a lot of people trying to say they don't celebrate October 7, trying to point out to the pain of the people in Gaza. And in fact, CTV commemorated the anniversary of October 7 and the 1,200 Israelis who were butchered on October 7, many of them, again, women and children, by doing an article on how Palestinian Canadians were feeling about that anniversary. And I'll just close this section here with a quote from Canadian Antifa member Charlotte Cates, who responded to the accusations that they were celebrating October 7 this way.
And so we see the fascist newspapers saying we are here to celebrate the 7th of October. Well, yes, we are here to celebrate the 7th of October.
So there you have it from the horse's mouth, as it were. It's really interesting to see the limits of progressive ideologies and the way that their intersectionality essentially eliminates the humanity of anybody they see as disagreeing with them. Because there's a horrifying documentary that I reviewed for the European Conservative. I don't necessarily recommend this documentary because I wish in some ways I'd never seen it. It was called Screams Before Silence. And it just detailed the sexual violence perpetrated against Israeli women and children, and even in some cases men, but primarily women and children by the Hamas terrorists. And it doesn't just include interviews with Hamas fighters, because the IDF actually released a lot of the interviews where they described that they'd been told to rape and that they enjoyed raping, and explaining why this was something that they had been commissioned to do. But it also has interviews with former hostages. And I think the worst part to watch was the people who had to clean up the mess afterwards at the site of the music festival where the Hamas terrorists first moved in the kibbutzes. People have heard a lot about the torture and the burning, but the things that were done to Israeli women defy description. In fact, I won't describe any of them. If anybody wants to get just a glimpse of it, you can look at the trailer of Screams Before Silence on YouTube. You can watch the whole documentary if you're the kind of person who's unpersuaded by the testimonies that we've been hearing over the past year. The trailer will give you just a glimpse of the horror that was perpetrated. And so what we're talking about is a mass rape event. We're talking about sexual crimes as a weapon of war. We're talking about the targeting of men, women, and children. And in many cases, those who were vulnerable only triggered the bloodlust of those who were targeting them even more. This is the kind of thing that's being defended here. Not an exchange of rockets, not two armies that are fighting each other, not an attack on IDF strongholds, not even an attack on IDF soldiers. What we're talking about here is a mass rape event perpetrated against civilians. And I want to show you two videos, or one video I think will do the trick here in Toronto, where leftist unions backed Islamists and joined them and talked about honoring the martyrs. The martyrs they're referring to here are the Hamas fighters that were killed when they came through the security fence on October 7 to do their butchering and their raping and their torturing. And then chanted, only one solution, Intifada revolution, which again is a glorification of attacks on civilians. Only one solution. Where have we heard one solution, final solution before? An Intifada revolution describes what unfolded on October 7. So take a look at what Canadian leftists and Canadian Islamists do when they get together. So it's important to see these video clips because there's always the temptation when you're angry about something to do what's referred to as nitpicking, right? Pick out a couple of crazy people saying a couple of crazy things and saying this represents the majority. And so these videos are important, A, because they show the scale of these rallies and the scale of these protests. And they've been happening in every major Canadian city. And there's shots have been taken at Jewish elementary schools. Protests have been done outside of Jewish old age homes. Any claim that this has to do with an objection to some of Israel's claims or some of their actions just completely melts away in the face of the actions of the Islamists, because what they are doing is they are targeting Jewish people because they were Jewish. The Vancouver protesters also headed over to Indigo. Why? Because Heather Reisman is a prominent member of Chapters Indigo and she's Jewish. Anybody who's Jewish gets targeted. A Jewish restaurant in Victoria was targeted. This is not an Israeli restaurant. Even if it was, that wouldn't excuse it, but it completely eliminates any excuse these people might have for saying that we're just objecting to the foreign policy of another nation, and therefore we're bringing this war to Canadian streets. No, what they're doing is they're targeting Jewish Canadians, and then they're claiming that they're targeting Jewish Canadians because of a political event somewhere else, a land dispute somewhere else, but then celebrating the horrors that took place on October 7. And so again, I'm not going to show you, I'm not even going to roll the trailer here for Screams Before Silence. I went through a whole bunch of videos to decide what to show you here because much of the violence was live streamed on October 7. I watched videos for almost a day. I think that I realized it was happening a few hours after it started, and I was watching videos that were getting live streamed to social media, even by Hamas fighters, families that were shielding their children. There was one couple who laid across their twin boys. They were murdered. Their two little boys were found next to their bodies almost 12 hours later. We saw horrifying videos of parents with their children where one of the children had been killed and the children were sobbing and we're not even allowed to grieve for the child who'd just been shot. There are so many stories, but I'm going to show you a video that was released actually just by the IDF that kind of gives a summary of what took place, just to give you a glimpse, knowing that I could post hundreds of clips here, but I think many of you will have already seen this stuff. So just for a moment, take a look at this video because it gives you a taste of what took place a year ago this week.
They came without warning. A relentless wave of terror that shattered everything in its path. In an instant, life changed forever. Homes once filled with laughter became battlefields. Streets that bustled with life were turned into scenes of horror. Innocent civilians, families, children became targets of a brutal attack that shook the very soul of Israel. Within hours, the unimaginable had unfolded. Approximately 1,200 lives stolen in cold blood, each one a story, a dream, a future, taken too soon. And as the dust settled, the realization of an even deeper horror hit. 251 innocent souls, kidnapped, torn from their homes, their families, and dragged into Gaza. Mothers, fathers, children. The pain, the fear, and the uncertainty they face every day is a burden we all carry.
So just so you know, In Canada, and not just Canada, I was talking to one of my friends in the UK the other day. The same thing's happening, of course, in major English cities, most of all in London, which is scarcely an English city at this point. In many major cities and on university campuses across the states, what we have is not a fundamental disagreement about specific policies of the state of Israel. What we have is a wave of anti-Semitism that is being perpetrated by people who openly celebrate the sorts of things that you just saw right now, that are openly celebrating prehistoric savagery that we should recognize has no place in any civilized society. But there's thousands of them taking to our streets in our major cities and celebrating this openly. These are not obscure people with obscure slogans that we're, uncovering on some Islamist Reddit board. These people are downtown and they're saying, yes, October 7, 10 more October 7s. We celebrate October 7. We celebrate the destruction of innocent people. This is something that we glory in. Glory to the martyrs. Glory to those who perpetrated these attacks. Glory to the young rapists who crossed the border to destroy and to kill. And this is not just being, again, defended by Islamists. It's also by leftists in the name of decolonization. And in a couple of those clips, you would have noticed that these were academics speaking. These were, blue-collar union people, left-wing union organizers. But let me give you just a few quotes that actually were released or published shortly after October 7th. That is to say, before the response of the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza, which again just strips this down to nuance and shows us what they think. Because this, when they gave you the quotes that I'm about to give you right now, because I collected a lot of these quotes just after October 7, when I kind of realized all these terms I've been hearing for a long time, like decolonization and settlers and colonialization in a progressive ideological context, are being applied to this orgy of rape and murder that we just saw live streamed onto X and onto Facebook and elsewhere, sometimes onto the Facebook pages of those who are being murdered. And before there was any response, before it was but Israel did this, at this point already, leftist academics in Canada were coming out and saying things like this. So freelance writer Najma Sharif wrote on X, quote, "What did you all think decolonization meant? Vibes? Papers? Essays? Losers." As it turns out, what she meant was the kinds of things that unfolded on October 7. These people saw what unfolded on October 7, and then they said these things before there was any Israeli response perpetrated against those who had initiated October 7. Canadian Liberal Member of Parliament and Parliamentary Secretary Ikra Khalid condemned the, quote, horrific attacks against Israel and Gaza before the Israeli response to the atrocities had even begun in a grotesque attempt at moral equivalence. At that point, the only Israelis in Gaza were those who had been kidnapped by Hamas fighters and taken to the tunnels. And she still said this. This is a member of the Trudeau government. Then there was Rivka Brown of Novara Media, who said, quote, "Today should be a day of celebration for supporters of democracy and human rights worldwide as Gazans break out of their open-air prison and Hamas fighters cross into their colonizers' territory. The struggle for freedom is rarely bloodless, and we shouldn't apologize for it." That's about as clear as you can get. It's always interesting when we're looking at the ancient land of Israel, the only people who never get called indigenous are the Jewish people. Sarah Shahid, who freelances for Now Toronto and for Spring Magazine, wrote, "What a glorious Saturday. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That is to say, Israel will be wiped off the map. There will be no Israel. Dr. Jessica Hutchison, an assistant professor of social work, big surprise, at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, wrote this: "I hope your upcoming acknowledgements will include support for Palestinians who are taking their land back from settler colonizers." So the girls who got raped, the children who got murdered, they had it coming because they were settler colonizers. Ever since October 7, I'm never going to hear settlers and colonizers the same way again, because I know that what it means when it comes out of the mouth of Canadian academics, at least, it justifies anything being done to you, anything being done to your children, anything being done to the women that you love. Yuhakia Mail, I probably mispronounced the name, but whatever, an assistant professor of Indigenous politics in the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto, near where these big protests are taking place, wrote this: "As Hawaiians wake up to the news of Palestinian anti-colonial resistance in Gaza to Israeli settler colonialism, remember that from Hawaii to Palestine, occupation is a crime. can't pronounce the word who that stands for decolonization and deoccupation should also stand behind freedom for Palestine. I think it bears mentioning here that the Israelis left Gaza in 2005 and in fact arrested and forcibly removed any Israeli settlers that were still in that territory. Hamas allowed them to have one election and then occupied all of Gaza, eliminated democracy, and it turned it into an Iranian proxy state. CUPE Local 3906, the faculty union at McMaster University, one of Canada's most prestigious university, wrote, "Palestine is rising. Long live the resistance." Long live the resistance against women and children. Dr. Emil J. Joseph, an associate professor of the School of Social Work, also at McMaster University, who sensitively includes his pronouns in his ex-bio, tweeted, quote, "Post-colonial, anti-colonial, and decolonial are not just words you hear in your EDA workshop." As Howard Anglin, a former Harper staffer, noted, next time someone hears these words in an EDI workshop, they should mentally substitute spitting on a naked woman's corpse, because that's what happened on the downtown streets of Gaza on October 7 and the following days. I can't help but think when I see these protests unfolding across Canada with genocidal chants, what Justin Trudeau did when he thought a few protesters in Ottawa were getting uppity during the Freedom Convoy. When that happened, when people were just protesting vaccine mandates, and I went to the Freedom Convoy, I covered it. There was no violence there whatsoever. Nobody was calling for genocide. Nobody was calling for the murder of Jewish people. Nobody was directly and deliberately intimidating Jewish people in their own homes, in their own elementary schools, in their own nursing care facilities. Nobody was taking shots at Jewish schools. None of that was happening, and yet it was the Emergency Measures Act, which is the redo of the War Measures Act. That's how big of a threat those people were. These anti-mandate protesters in Ottawa were. And yet we've been watching for a year as people openly call for the genocide of Jewish people in Israel, who openly celebrate October 7, who openly proclaim their loyalty and fidelity to terrorist groups that are recognized as terrorist groups by the Canadian government. And what do we get? Every once in a while, Justin Trudeau releases a half-decent statement. His statement on October 7 was too little too late for the anniversary of October 7, I should say, but it was better than nothing. But he sends out one MP to the mosques and he sends out another MP to the synagogues, and he talks out of both sides of his mouth, because the kinds of people protesting in downtown Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, those are mostly his voters. Those are mostly his voters, which is why even as Jewish people are targeted in Canada, even as we've seen more than 100 churches burned down since 2021, Justin Trudeau talks constantly about Islamophobia. Just Google Justin Trudeau's name and Islamophobia, or plug into the Twitter search bar, and all you'll get is his statements, one of them very, very recent. And yet he almost insists on ignoring what's taking place in his Canada, Canada that he has now run for 10 years. He is responsible for this. I was at a commemorative event in Toronto on Monday night with my wife and some friends, and thousands were there, over 20,000 according to the National Post. It was a massive crowd. It was a very, very moving event. Hebrew prayers were spoken and Hebrew songs were sung, and it just reminded me once again that the Jewish people are indigenous to the nation of Israel, as is seen throughout the entire Holy Scriptures, and that came through so clearly during this event. There was very moving prayers for the return of hostages. They showed some footage of what October 7 looked like, worse footage than we showed you in this episode. And there was hundreds of people that were in tears as they were watching this take place. There were relatives of people who were murdered on October 7 who took the stage and spoke. A rabbi recited the Kaddish, which is the prayer to the dead. And as he started speaking, hundreds of people in the crowd recited it along with him. And in one moment, names like Sderot, which is in Israel and one of the places that was attacked, were listed alongside Auschwitz and Babi Yar, which was incredibly chilling and gave a real focus to this moment in history that we're all living through. And there was, of course, Israeli flags everywhere, and that struck me as well. Each pogrom, each massacre, for the people that were gathered there on Monday night in Toronto, was a reminder of why Israel is so necessary. It was a reminder of why they believe a Jewish state is so essential. Because at the end of the day, I've been told this by many Jewish friends, they need there to be a place they can flee to when they see the Western countries selling them out once again. Betraying the Jews is the oldest story in the book. Anti-Semites like to claim it's the reverse. But what we've seen happen here in Canada has really haunting echoes for a lot of the people who were gathered there on Monday night. Really, really haunting echoes. Jesse Brown of Canadaland, a hardcore progressive left-winger that I agree with on nothing, has been getting a ton of flack from his progressive friends for pointing out what happened on October 7 and for highlighting the anti-Semitism that has been sweeping Canada's elite institutions. And he posted this really heartbreaking message on X where he said to all of his progressive friends and he thought once progressive allies, I always wondered what you'd do when anti-Semitism reared its ugly head, whether you would justify it or equivocate or whether you would stand alongside me. And I didn't even dare, I was too embarrassed to say what I actually thought, that the Jews at the end of the day would end up standing alone. And yet he said, here we are. And I've heard that a lot. Each betrayal in each Western city does not actually weaken Israeli resolve, something that a lot of people trying to comment on this issue don't understand, but it reminds the Jewish people why Israel is so essential for them. One of the people, one of the speakers there was a couple who told their story, a young man and a young woman. She was 9 months pregnant. She was one of the kibbutzes that Hamas attacked. She was talking to her husband who was on his way to work in the car. She was talking to him when he was shot several times through the stomach. She phoned to get help. She tried to get people there to rescue him and get him taken to the hospital. Then she finally had to retreat to the safe room. And she told this really heartbreaking story. She's 9 months pregnant, and she thought, I'm dead. And she said she prayed to God and said, I've had 33 years. I don't even ask for more years, but please, by some miracle, spare my baby. And she laid on the ground in the safe room, and she covered up her belly with blankets so that if they broke through the door like they did to so many safe rooms and shot her or killed her, they would maybe not notice she was pregnant. They would maybe leave her baby alone, because there are instances where the Hamas terrorists actually cut the babies out of the wombs of Israeli women. Now, God spared her and her husband. He was unconscious on October 7. He didn't wake up for days. And they were, of course, in Toronto to tell us their story. But it was a reminder, again, of the savagery that the Jewish people have experienced, that they did experience on October 7, and the savagery that is being justified by left-wing Canadians, that is being kind of looked at through the corner of the eye by the Trudeau government, who recognizes that the people rioting and yelling and screaming on the streets are people who usually vote for them, which is why you've got Jewish MPs that just aren't sure what to do, why you see Israel's right to defend itself being questioned despite what actually happened. And it was just a good reminder of what happens when we say that our society is open to those who hate us and hate our values. And so it was very moving, profound, and good to be remembering the victims of October 7 this week, and to pray for the return of the hostages. And another reminder to me, and I hope to any of you who are watching, to pray for the return of those hostages as well. Thank you so much for watching The Bridgehead. We really hope that you're getting informed by The Bridgehead Briefing. Any story suggestions you might have, things you'd like to see us cover, please drop those in the comments. We're trying to give a social conservative perspective on what's going on in Canada, the US, and across the West. And we're trying to cover stories that other people aren't covering to help you process the news that you read on a daily basis and hopefully interrupt your doom scroll with some analysis that might be helpful. And so if you'd like to follow the podcast, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you download your content, and you can find us there. And if you found the content helpful, please do share it around. Thanks so much for listening, and hopefully you'll join us again next week.